At my granddaughter's wedding, they gave me a name tag that said, "The Absent Old Lady." No one flinched. No one laughed. They simply handed it to me like it was my rightful title. I pinned it on with trembling fingers, smiled for the pictures, then quietly left before the first dance. What they didn't know was that by the time they raised their champagne glasses, the final payment for the lavish event had already been rerouted to the one person they tried so hard to erase. You here follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has. The elegant chords of Pachelbel's canon swirled around me as I stepped into the grand ballroom of the Bellamy Hotel, the soft click of my low heels swallowed by the plush carpet. I had spent 3 full hours preparing for Elsie's wedding, my stiff fingers fumbling with every tiny pearl button on the pale blue dress I'd purchased by setting aside bits of my Social Security check each month. "You'll look beautiful, Ellanar," I had told myself that morning as I applied a hint of lipstick and pinned up my silver hair into a tidy bun. I was 70, yes, but I still held on to a sense of pride in my appearance, especially for days like this, for family occasions that once meant everything to me. My heart fluttered, not just with anticipation, but with a small, flickering hope that today might bridge the distance time had wedged between me and the people I loved. After months of silence, of holiday calls that lasted barely 2 minutes, I was finally going to be with them again. With Elsie, my only granddaughter. When the formal, impersonal wedding invitation had arrived 6 weeks earlier, I'd replied without hesitation. I told myself this could be the chance, the beginning of something healing. A woman at the reception desk, young, lean, her ponytail sharp as the edge of her tone, greeted me without lifting her eyes from her tablet. "Name?" she asked flatly. "Ellanar Walsh," I said, my voice steady, maybe even a little proud. "I'm the bride's grandmother." Her fingers skimmed the screen. "Right." She slid a badge toward me across the table. I picked it up, expecting to see my name printed in elegant script. But what stared back at me in messy handwriting were 4 words: "The Absent Old Lady." My hands shook slightly as I held the tag. I blinked, thinking surely there was a mistake, a cruel accident. "Excuse me all," I said softly. "There seems to be an error." "We're quite busy, ma'am," she interrupted, already looking past me. "The ceremony starts in 20 minutes. Please find your seat." I stared at the badge in my hand. The paper was light, yet heavier than anything I'd carried in years. Across the room, I saw Elsie, radiant in her designer gown, her laughter gliding above the chatter of bridesmaids. She looked happy. She looked nothing like the little girl who used to wrap her arms around me as I pulled cookies from the oven. Beside her stood my son James, so handsome in his tuxedo, with his arms snug around Diane's waist. And there was Franklin, Elsie's soon-to-be husband, tall, all angles and sharp edges, with ambition clear in every glance. I had only met him twice. Each time he'd looked through me as though I were smoke in the air. I pinned the badge to my chest, the metal clip pressed against my skin, each movement of my fingers feeling like surrender. But it didn't matter. No one would notice. No one had, for a long time. An usher guided me to my seat without meeting my eyes. I ended up in a far corner of the room, behind a towering bouquet that blocked most of the altar. I settled into the chair carefully, arranging my dress so the wrinkles wouldn't show, clutching my small beaded purse. Inside was a check, 3 months of saving on a tight budget. My gift. "This seat taken?" I looked up. An older gentleman stood beside me, gesturing to the empty chair. "No, please," I said, grateful for a human voice. "Have a seat." "Herbert Miller," he said, settling in. "Friend of the family." "Ellanar Walsh. I'm Elsie's grandmother." His brows shot up. "The bride's grandmother sitting all the way back here?" I smiled, a well-worn expression I'd practiced for decades. The one I wore at birthdays, at holidays, any time I was invited, really. I became good at pretending. "It's fine," I murmured, but it wasn't. The ceremony passed in fragments. I caught glimpses between flower stems. When Elsie and Franklin spoke their vows, I could barely see them. When the guests stood to applaud, I stood too, brushing away a single tear. Not from joy, from something closer to resignation. At the reception, my seat was at table 19, the furthest table. The card labeled it Extended Connections. I sat with old coworkers, friends of friends, people who didn't know me and didn't really want to. I watched as James stood for his father of the bride's speech. He spoke of Elsie's childhood, the memories they shared, and I stood there in silence, hearing moments I had lived, ones I had helped shape, omitted. No mention of how I'd raised her during the years after his divorce. When he was too busy rebuilding a career to raise a teenage daughter, it was me she came home to. Dinner passed slowly. Afterward, I approached the bridal table, envelope in hand. Elsie saw me, then turned to Franklin and whispered something. They both looked at me, then quickly turned away, pretending to chat with the best man. "Elsie, darling," he said as I reached them, "you look absolutely beautiful." She turned. Her smile was brief, restrained. "Oh, Grandma, you made it." "Of course. I wouldn't miss your special day." I held out the envelope. "A small gift." "You can leave it with the others," she said quickly, motioning toward a table overflowing with glittering wrapped boxes. "We're about to start the dance." And then she turned away, before I could kiss her cheek. I placed the envelope among the mountain of expensive gifts, swallowing the sting rising in my throat. But then something caught my eye. A clipboard, left carelessly on a nearby chair, belonging to the wedding planner. I looked down, and there it was, under the column marked Special Arrangements. Ellanar Walsh. Isolated seating, minimal interaction. As requested by bride's mother. The words hit me like ice. A fist to the chest. All these years I'd told myself they were busy, that life just got in the way. I'd explained away the silence, the missed birthdays, the 5-minute calls on Christmas. But this was intentional, planned. And something in me, something that had bent and yielded and waited quietly for years, finally snapped. I walked away from the ballroom. Near the coat check, I stood quietly, pressing my hand to my chest, trying to steady myself. A wave of memories broke over me, unrelenting and vivid. I remembered rushing to the hospital the day Elsie was born, carrying a handmade blanket I had spent months knitting with love. I remembered the summers she stayed with me while James and Diane tried to fix their marriage. How she'd sit at the kitchen table drawing fairies and telling me her dreams, while I baked her favorite chocolate chip cookies. And now I was the absent old lady, but they wouldn't forget me today. Not after what came next. The cookies were still warm when the memories began to flood back. Those early years had been a treasure. I was the one who taught her to sound out letters, to dig her hands into the earth and coax flowers to bloom, to sit still and really hear the beauty in Bach and Chopin. I was the one who noticed how she could lose herself in a sketch pad for hours. And so I bought her first set of watercolors, hoping she'd find herself there. When she won that school art competition at 10, it was my shoulder she wept on, her small body trembling with happiness. "You believed in me first," she had whispered, tears soaking through my blouse. But everything began to shift the day James finally divorced Diane and married Sandra, 3 years later. Sandra came from old money, country clubs, trust funds, a family name people recognized in whispers. And just like that, my modest house and my simple, frugal lifestyle became something to be politely endured, then gradually avoided altogether. Elsie's visits shortened, became less frequent, then eventually stopped, except for the dutiful holidays that felt more like obligations than reunions. I sold my home when I turned 65. That old house, where I'd raised James alone after his father, my Henry, died of a heart attack at 42. James had only been 13. I had worked 2 jobs just to put him through college, scrimped on groceries, patched up clothes, and turned down the heat every winter to save enough. That house had been a part of me, filled with the echoes of every small joy and heartbreak. But James had said they needed help with Elsie's wish on at a prestigious private art academy. "It's an investment in her future, Mom," he'd told me. "This could change her life." I'd believed him. Of course I had. I would have given up the ground beneath my feet if it meant giving that little girl a chance. So I sold the house. The $175,000 went straight into Elsie's education fund. I moved into a small 1-bedroom apartment far from everything I knew, in a complex that trembled every time a semi barreled down the nearby highway. I told myself it was cozy, not cramped. that the rattling windows were ambiance, not noise. James promised they'd visit every Sunday. That promise lived for exactly 3 weeks. Then Sundays became monthly drop-ins. Then just the holidays. Eventually, even Christmas turned into a brief 2-hour appearance. Late arrivals, early exits, arms full of gifts I'd painstakingly chosen and wrapped, though I never saw Elsie wear or use a single one. And now here I was, standing alone in the farthest corner of a lavish ballroom, invisible to the people I'd sacrificed everything for. They were laughing, clinking glasses, taking photos, dancing, celebrating without even noticing I was there. "Mrs. Walsh?" A soft voice pulled me out of my thoughts. I turned to see an older gentleman in a crisp chauffeur's uniform. "George Miller," he said warmly. "I used to drive for the Hendersons, next door to you, years ago." "George," I smiled, truly smiled, recognizing a friendly face in the blur of unfamiliarity. What a small world. "I work for Elite Limousine now," he said. "I'm assigned to the wedding party this evening." He looked at me more closely, concern creasing his brow. "Are you all right, Mrs. Walsh? You look troubled." Something about his kindness, gentle and unexpected, cracked through the shell I had so carefully maintained all evening. "Oh, George," I whispered, "I don't think I belong here." I held up my name tag, a pitiful little badge that screamed afterthought. His expression darkened. "That's disgraceful," he said in a low voice. "Absolutely disgraceful." "It's been like this for years," I said quietly. I just didn't want to believe it. George glanced at his watch. "My shift runs until midnight, but I've got pickups for the next few hours. Would you like me to drive you home?" "No charge, of course." I looked back at the ballroom where guests were beginning to gather around the cake table. Another moment I would spend watching from a distance. I turned back to George. "They won't even notice I'm gone," I said, surprised at the calm in my voice. George offered his arm. "My car's right outside, Mrs. Walsh." As we walked through the hotel lobby, I passed the wedding planner deep in conversation with the hotel manager. They were hunched over a document, and I caught a few words. "Final payment due tonight. Bride's parents' card is on file. Balance $42,875. I paused. The idea that followed was faint at first, barely a whisper, but it grew quickly, rippling outward like a stone dropped into water. Seated in the limousine's soft leather seats, I asked, "Do you know who's paying for the wedding?" "The bride's parents arranged everything through Elite," George replied. "Mr. James Walsh put down the deposits. But the final contract lists both him and the bride as financially responsible." I nodded, remembering that Thanksgiving conversation I hadn't meant to overhear, James whispering to Sandra, "Mom's house money covered most of Elsie's tuition, but we had to dip into savings for the wedding. Thank God for those zero-interest credit cards." "George," I asked carefully, "how well do you know the management at the Bellamy?" "Fairly well, Mrs. Walsh. I've been driving their VIPs for 7 years now. If I wanted to make a change to the payment arrangements for tonight's event, who would I speak to?" He caught my eye in the rearview mirror. "Are you thinking what I think you're thinking?" For the first time that night, I smiled, not the polite, practiced smile I'd worn like armor, but something real. "I'm not sure," I said, "but I think I've been absent long enough, don't you?" The next morning, my phone rang endlessly. I let it go to the answering machine, curling my fingers around a warm teacup, sunlight pouring through the window like quiet validation. James's voice filled the room, strained and furious. "Mom, what the hell did you do? The hotel says the payment was canceled and rearranged. They're charging us the full amount. Call me back now." Another ring. Sandra this time. Shrill, accusatory. Last night, after George dropped me off, I had him take me straight to the Bellamy's billing office. The night manager was skeptical at first, but when I presented my ID and explained I wanted to remove my complimentary grandmother contribution from the event, he finally nodded. "Family disagreement?" he asked gently. "Family clarification," I said. Now another voicemail. "Elsie, tearful. Franklin's parents are horrified. Our honeymoon might be canceled. How could you do this to me on my special day?" I thought of the name tag, of the seat hidden behind the flower arrangements, of minimal interaction requested. I thought of my house, the tuition fund, the countless Sundays I'd waited for a knock that never came. I sipped my tea, steady hands cradling the cup. And then I began to plan the next chapter of my life. One where I was no longer absent. One where finally I mattered. To myself. The voicemails kept coming over the next 3 days, a storm of increasingly desperate voices, each sounding more far away. I listened to them like one might listen to the weather in a foreign country, vaguely aware but untouched. Mom, we need to talk. Now. James's voice had lost that sharp, commanding tone. What replaced it? Something softer, almost pleading. Panic, she wrote. Ellanar, please be reasonable. Sandra's message came through as a brittle echo of her usual condescending tone, but this time anxiety bled through every word. This is becoming embarrassing for everyone. By the fourth day, the mask slipped further. Grandma, came Elsie's voice, teary but controlled, the kind of carefully measured sorrow that felt less like heartbreak and more like performance. We're having to cancel our honeymoon to Bali. Is that what you wanted? To ruin my special time with Franklin? I sat alone at the small kitchen table, my fingertip tracing slow circles along the rim of my teacup. Morning sunlight poured through the window, catching on the drifting dust motes, casting them in a lazy ballet. Outside, a garbage truck clattered and beeped its way down the street, a mundane metronome ticking behind my thoughts. I had braced for fury, even satisfaction. But what filled me instead was a dull, echoing emptiness. No satisfaction, just the faintest pulse of something else, a quiet resolve, fragile but real. The doorbell jolted me from my reverie. Through the peephole, I spotted James shifting his weight in irritation, his designer watch flashing as he checked the time with habitual impatience. Beside him stood Sandra, arms tightly crossed, her lips a thin line of silent condemnation. I considered not opening the door, but some instincts are hard to unlearn. I'd never been able to turn my son away, even after all the ways he'd left me behind. Mom, James said the moment I cracked the door, skipping any pretense of pleasantries. This has gone far enough. You need to fix this. I stepped aside wordlessly, letting them in. Their gazes skimmed over the modest furnishings of my apartment. Plain furniture, a sagging sofa, faded curtains, with a mix of pity and disapproval barely hidden behind polite facades. Would you like some tea? I asked, out of habit more than sincerity. We don't have time for tea, Sandra snapped. Do you even realize what you've done? I settled into my armchair, nodding toward the sofa for them to sit. James remained standing, his hands jammed into his pockets like he was holding back something explosive. I simply clarified the financial arrangements, I said, steady. As the grandmother of the bride, I was expected to contribute. But as the grandmother who's been steadily excluded, I felt it only fitting that my contribution be equally absent. James's face turned red. What are you talking about? I stood and walked to the sideboard where my handbag had remained untouched since the wedding night. I pulled out a name badge and placed it on the coffee table between us. Sandra's eyes flickered toward it for a second, then away. James picked it up, turning it over in his hands, confusion wrinkling his forehead. This must have been a mistake, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Was it a mistake to seat me behind the floral arrangements? I asked. Was it a mistake when the wedding planner's notes specified minimal interaction with me? Sandra's eyes darted toward James, silent warnings in her glance. We didn't, James began, but I cut him off. Please don't lie to me. My voice was calm, almost gentle, but unwavering. I've had enough lies over the years, enough broken promises about Sunday visits that never came, enough assurances that the money from my house was being put to good use. The air thickened with silence. Mom, James tried again, slipping into his practiced professional tone, the one I imagined he used to smooth over angry clients. I understand you're upset, but this reaction is completely disproportionate. The hotel is demanding $42,000 right now. We don't have that kind of liquid cash. I sold my house for $175,000, I said quietly. Every last cent went toward Elsie's education because you told me it was an investment in her future. So tell me, James, where did the rest of the money go? He shifted uncomfortably. That's not really relevant right now. Oh, but it is. My voice sharpened. That money was supposed to carry me through my retirement. Instead, I'm here, in this place, with a leaking ceiling and a radiator that wheezes like it's dying all winter long. While you and Sandra live in a 5-bedroom house in Oakwood Hills, while Elsie wears designer labels and takes European vacations. Sandra stood abruptly. We didn't come here to be interrogated about our finances. We came to resolve the hotel situation. I turned my eyes on her. This woman, so polished, so practiced, who had gradually erased me from my own son's life and from my granddaughter's memories. The hotel matter is already resolved, as I said. The bill will be paid by the appropriate parties as specified in the contract. James's calm cracked. We can't afford this right now, he burst out. The business is in a tough spot, and with the down payment on Elsie and Franklin's condo, he stopped. Too late. You bought them a condo? I asked softly. That's where the rest of my house money went, isn't it? The silence answered for them. Get out, I said, barely above a whisper. James blinked, stunned. Mom, come on, you're not serious. I've never been more serious in my life. I stood, my knees screamed, but I ignored them. Get out of my home. Sandra narrowed her eyes as she brushed past me. This isn't over, she warned. You're right, I said. It's just beginning. The door clicked shut behind them. I sank slowly into my chair, every joint trembling. Confronting them had taken more from me than they would ever realize. For years, I'd accepted crumbs, an occasional phone call, a birthday text, telling myself it was enough. I was too afraid of losing even that bare minimum to ever ask for more. But now I had crossed the line. There would be fallout, retaliation maybe. I was terrified, and yet, underneath the fear, something else glowed. A quiet flame. Determination. The phone rang. I stared at the unknown number flashing on the screen. I answered. Mrs. Walsh, this is Walter Drummond from First Capital Bank. I'm calling about your safety deposit box. There seems to be some confusion I'd like to clear up. My grip tightened around the phone. What kind of confusion? Your son James came in this morning, Walter said carefully, with a power of attorney document requesting access to your box. It looked suspicious to us, so we denied the request until we could confirm with you. My free hand clenched around the edge of the table to steady myself. I never signed a power of attorney. That's exactly what concerned me, Walter replied. Would you be able to come in today to review the document in person? An hour later, I sat in his office, staring at the form he'd placed before me. My signature looked back at me, familiar, but not quite right, a clever imitation. Not my hand. This is a forgery, I said. My voice was unnervingly steady, even though my insides churned. Walter nodded gravely. I suspected as much, Mrs. Walsh, I strongly recommend you take immediate steps to secure your assets. If they're trying this, it's likely there are other risks we need to look at. I found myself thinking about the modest inheritance Henry had left behind, quietly tucked away in that safety deposit box. Municipal bonds, a few trinkets whose worth was rooted more in memory than money, my mother's string of pearls, Henry's old pocket watch. Treasures really, in the way that only things tied to love and history can be. What do you suggest? I asked. Before Walter could answer, his desk phone rang. He picked it up, listened for a moment, then placed a hand over the receiver. It's your son, he said. He's in the lobby. He's insisting on speaking with me. Something shifted inside me then. A subtle but unmistakable click. A door closing, a bridge burning, something permanent. Tell him I'm here, I said, my voice steady. It's time we finally had an honest conversation. When James walked into Walter Drummond's office and saw me sitting there, all the color drained from his face. He stopped mid-stride, that easy confidence slipping from his posture. Mom, he said, his voice tight and controlled. I've been looking everywhere for you. Have you? I asked calmly. Or have you just been searching for access to my safety deposit box? Walter rose from his chair, a quiet authority in his stance despite the wear of age. Mr. Walsh, I said evenly, I've informed you already that the document you provided shows irregularities. In fact, your mother has just confirmed she never signed it. James's eyes flicked from Walter to me, quick and sharp, scanning the situation. That calculating gleam behind his gaze, I recognized it instantly. I'd seen it when he was 7 and lied about breaking my favorite vase. When he was 16 and took the car without asking. When he was 24 and begged for money to fund a business that never quite materialized. There must be some misunderstanding, he said, smoothly switching into damage control mode. Mom, remember? We talked about this months ago after your fall. I stared at him, unmoving. I never fell. Not once, he pressed on, undeterred. You said it might be easier if I helped manage some things for you. You were worried about keeping up with everything as you got older. Lies, all of it. A carefully scripted scene from a conversation that never existed. Walter's expression turned to stone. Mr. Walsh, he said firmly, falsifying a power of attorney is a very serious offense. And there it was, a flicker in James's eyes. That well-practiced mask of his cracked, just for a second, and behind it I saw panic. I would never, this is ridiculous. Mom, please, tell him this is all a big mistake. I looked at him, truly looked. The tailored suit, cut sharp but still unable to hide the soft swell of his belly. The artfully styled hair that just barely disguised the creeping recession. The manicured hands, the flashy watch, symbols of a man clinging to appearances. When did he become this? This man capable of forging my signature, trying to steal what little I had left? The only mistake, I said softly, was believing you still had any respect for me. His face flushed red. That's not fair. I've always what? I interrupted. Always remembered my birthday? Always made sure I was included in family holidays? Always been honest about where the money from my house went? The silence that followed was unbearable in its clarity. Walter stepped in gently. Mrs. Walsh, would you like me to call security? I shook my head. No, but I do want to make some changes to my accounts. James took a step forward. Mom, you're overreacting. Let's go home and talk about this. My home, I corrected. The small apartment I live in now because I sold my house to help Elsie? Except apparently the money went toward a condo for her and Franklin instead. Walter cleared his throat. Mr. Walsh, I need to speak with your mother privately. I'll have to ask you to leave. She's confused, James objected. She's getting older, and sometimes... I'm 70, I said sharply, not senile, and I've never been clearer in my life. Leave now, James, or Mr. Drummond will call security. He hesitated, jaw tightening. Then he straightened his jacket and walked toward the door. This isn't over, he said, echoing Sandra's earlier words. No, I replied evenly. It isn't. Once he was gone, Walter turned to me, his voice gentler now. Mrs. Walsh, I strongly recommend we take immediate steps to protect your finances. For the next hour, Walter helped me revoke every bit of access James might have had. We changed passwords, updated security questions, reviewed all account privileges. He even referred me to a small law firm nearby that specialized in elder financial protection. It might be a good idea to speak with them, he said. Given the attempted forgery, there could be other risks we haven't considered. I nodded. I felt drained, but also strangely stronger. Thank you, Walter. I don't know what might have happened if you hadn't called me. He smiled kindly, the corners of his eyes creasing with warmth. I've been a banker for 43 years, Mrs. Walsh. I've seen families at their best and their worst. Sadly, money often brings out the latter. I gathered my purse to leave. Walter hesitated for a moment. Mrs. Walsh, Ellanar, may I ask what you plan to do now? I paused, considered it. I'm not entirely sure, I admitted, but for the first time in years, I'll be the one making that decision. Outside, the city moved around me. Cars, pedestrians, a blur of movement and noise. I stood on the sidewalk, momentarily overwhelmed by it all, by the rush of freedom and the terrifying weight of possibility. For years, my life had narrowed into a quiet apartment, awkward family gatherings, and the constant ache of being merely tolerated. And now, just like that, I was free. Free from their expectations. Free from the exhausting hope that one day they might truly see me. But freedom, I was learning, could be frightening. My phone rang, Sandra again. I declined the call without hesitation. Instead, I dialed a number I hadn't used in months. Hello, came the warm, familiar voice on the other end. Helen, I said. But my voice catching slightly. It's Ellanar. I was wondering, is your offer to visit still open? Helen had been my closest friend for over 40 years before she moved to Maine 5 years ago to be closer to her daughter. She'd asked me countless times to come visit, and I'd always said no, always afraid to be too far if James or Elsie might need me. Ellanar, she exclaimed, of course it's still open. I've been saving your room for ages. When can you come? For the first time in days, I felt a smile forming, real, effortless, reaching all the way to my eyes. How about next week? I said. That evening, I began packing a small suitcase for my trip. Just as I was folding the last sweater, the doorbell rang again. Elsie, she stood in the hallway, her eyes red, her expression carefully constructed, with just the right blend of guilt and self-righteousness. Grandma, she said, her voice shaking slightly, we need to talk. I opened the door, letting her inside. At least she had the grace to hug me, even if it felt more like a duty than affection. Would you like some tea? I asked. She shook her head. I can't stay long, she drew in a breath. I had wandered sunlit villages with a brush in hand and a sketchbook under my arm, letting color and form express the sorrow I couldn't put into words. It had been the first weekend I felt I could breathe again after losing him. You really think I could do it again? I asked. Unsure, my fingers curled loosely around the handle of my teacup. I do, Helen said with quiet certainty. Not because you need to prove anything, but because it might help you remember who you are when no one else is demanding a piece of you. That struck something deep inside me. For so long, I had existed in the margins of other people's needs. Mother, grandmother, silent supporter. Now the idea of creating something that was mine alone stirred something like hope. The next morning, I walked with Helen to the town's modest art center, a weathered brick building nestled between a bakery and a bookstore. Irene, a plump woman with a ready smile and paint-flecked glasses, greeted me like an old friend. So you're the mystery artist, she said warmly. Helen's told me all about you. We could use someone with heart, not just skill. I laughed nervously, unsure if I had either anymore. But by the end of the tour, something inside me had settled. The scent of paint, the gentle quiet of creative concentration. It felt like stepping into a memory I didn't know I'd missed. That afternoon, I began an unpacking in the guest room, taking my time, placing framed photos on the windowsill, me and Henry in Marseille, Elsie as a toddler clutching a stuffed bear, a candid shot of James laughing before life hardened the lines in his face. I wasn't ready to erase them, even if I wasn't going back. Later, I sat on the deck alone, my sketch pad in my lap. The ocean shimmered in the fading light, and with hesitant strokes, I began to draw. Not perfectly, not confidently, but honestly. My lines trembled, just like my heart, but they were mine. Inside, my phone remained off. Let them wonder. Let them feel the silence they'd so often handed me. For now, I had color. I had peace. I had space to heal. And perhaps, in this small coastal town, I might just find the version of myself I had long ago tucked away behind wedding invitations and babysitting schedules. The one who still believed in beauty. The one who finally remembered her own worth. The one who would never again apologize for living a life that belonged to her. We used to sit for hours in lavender fields or in quiet village squares, sketching and painting, trying to capture on paper the beauty that surrounded us. Back then, during one of the darkest periods of my life, those moments had been nothing short of a lifeline. I'm not sure I even remember how to teach anymore, I admitted. Helen laughed gently, that warm, knowing kind of laugh. It's like riding a bike, she said. Besides, the job pays, not much, but enough to supplement your social security. And you could stay here as long as you like, ma rentrée. Helen, I couldn't possibly impose on you. It's not an imposition, she said firmly. This house is far too big for just me. The guest room sits empty all year except for when my daughter visits during Christmas. And honestly, I've missed having my best friend around. Her words brought sudden tears to my eyes. You're serious? Truly? Absolutely. Stay for a week or a month. If you like it, stay longer. There's no pressure, no expectations. No pressure, no expectations. The phrase settled over me like a soft blessing, soothing and light. 2 days later, an email arrived from Walter Drummond at the bank. James had shown up again, this time with Sandra in tow, demanding answers about the power of attorney. They claimed it had all been a misunderstanding. When Walter explained that I had left town indefinitely, they immediately pushed for details on my whereabouts. Walter, of course, gave them nothing. "I just wanted to warn you," his message concluded. "They seem determined to find you. Mr. Walsh said something about a family emergency requiring your immediate attention." I gave a dry, humorless smile. A family emergency, I thought. Likely the hotel bill, or maybe they'd concocted some new financial crisis I was expected to solve. That afternoon, I went to meet Irene at the Art Center, a renovated boathouse perched above the harbor. The space was bright and open, with huge windows that flooded the room with the soft, ever-changing coastal light. "Helen's told me wonderful things about your work," Irene said, as she led me around the studio. "We've had a surge of interest in our beginner classes, but our current instructor can't handle all the students alone." "I've never taught formally before," I confessed. "I'm not even sure I'd be good at it." Irene, brisk, with cropped gray hair and paint-streaked jeans, waved off my doubts. "Do you love painting?" "Yes," I answered instantly. "Can you explain how to mix colors, how to hold a brush properly, how to see not objects but shapes and light?" My mind flashed to the hours I'd spent guiding Elsie's tiny hand years ago, helping her paint her first trees, flowers, and people. "Yes," I said, "I can do that." "Then you can teach," Irene declared without hesitation. "Start next Tuesday with the morning group. Mostly retirees, very forgiving of new teachers." While we ironed out the details, my phone, recently powered on again, began to ring. The name flashing across the screen stopped me cold. Elsie. "Excuse me," I said softly. "I need to take this." I stepped outside into the salt air and answered. "Hello, Elsie." "Grandma." Her voice was taut with emotion. "Where are you? We've been worried sick." "I'm visiting a friend," I said evenly. "Just like I told you I would." "Dad says you drained your accounts and disappeared. He says you're having some kind of breakdown." I let out a short, bitter laugh, the sound whisked away by the breeze. "I'm not having a breakdown, Elsie. For once, I'm just putting myself first." "But what about the family? What about the hotel bill?" she began, and I finished it for her. "Or is there another financial emergency you need me to cover?" Her silence told me everything. "Elsie," I said gently, "do you remember when you were 6 and I taught you to paint?" "What does that have to do with anything?" she asked, her voice tight with frustration. "It has everything to do with it," I replied. "I've just accepted a job teaching watercolor at the Art Center. I'll be staying here for a while." "Where is here?" she demanded. I looked out over the harbor where fishing boats bobbed softly under the amber light of late afternoon. Seagulls dipped and circled in the sky. A quiet, profound peace settled deep in my chest. "Somewhere I'm respected," I said. "Somewhere I belong." Autumn in coastal Maine had dressed the world in blazing reds and golds. It had been 3 months since I'd fled my old life. 3 months of serene mornings watching the sunrise over the Atlantic, afternoons teaching eager students the basics of watercolor, and evenings spent on Helen's deck, sipping wine and swapping memories beneath a quilt of stars. The modest salary I earned at the Art Center was enough to cover my expenses. I'd opened a new bank account at a local branch and moved my funds out of the city. Walter had been indispensable in making sure James would never again access any part of my finances. The calls from my family had slowly become less frequent. James left increasingly bitter voicemails, each more clipped and angry than the last. Sandra tried a more saccharine approach, leaving messages dripping with guilt about how much everyone missed me, how poor Elsie was suffering without my guidance. Only Elsie's calls carried even a hint of genuine concern, but even those came laced with subtle reminders of the wedding and the unspoken expectation that I'd eventually return to help with the costs. I kept my responses short and vague, never revealing my location. And each conversation inevitably ended with the same question. When would I come to my senses and go back home? It was a quiet Tuesday morning in late October when Helen stepped into the kitchen, her expression troubled. She handed me the local newspaper without a word. "You might want to see this," she said softly. There it was, tucked in the real estate section, a small, eye-catching listing. Historic Maine cottage for sale, ideal vacation home or retirement property. Lovingly maintained for generations, this charming seaside residence boasts original details and breathtaking ocean views. Contact Walsh Properties for more information. Beneath the listing was a photograph of my parents' old summer cottage, the one they had left to me, the one I had faithfully maintained all these years, even though I'd rarely had the chance to visit, the one I had almost forgotten I still owned. My hands trembled as I set the paper down. "This can't be real," I whispered. "I never authorized any of this. The deed is in my name alone." Helen's eyes searched mine, filled with worry. "The contact info," she said carefully. "Walsh Properties?" I nodded grimly. "James's real estate development firm." Without hesitation, I called my bank in the city. Walter wasn't available, but his assistant promised he'd return my call as soon as possible. Next, I reached out to the clerk's office in the county where the cottage was located. Deliberate effort to take control of everything I had. And it wasn't just about the cottage. It was everything that came before. Every overlooked betrayal, every time I was dismissed, every time my worth was measured only by what I could provide. There was silence on the other end. I could picture her sitting there, lips parted, shocked that I'd finally said aloud what I had swallowed for decades. "But we're family," she said quietly. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the ache settle. "Family doesn't treat you like a resource to be exploited," I said. "Family doesn't lie and steal and expect forgiveness without accountability." "You always said forgiveness was the key to peace," she reminded me, her voice tinged with something between desperation and guilt. "I did," I acknowledged. "But peace isn't the same as submission. I've confused the two for far too long." I heard a soft, shaky breath. Then she said, "I didn't know you felt this way. Because I never told you. I was too busy trying to keep everything from falling apart. But now that it's all crumbled anyway, there's nothing left to protect except what little I still have of myself." Another pause stretched between us like an ocean. "Will I ever see you again?" she asked. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Maybe someday, if things truly change. But it won't be because I gave more than I had to give. That part of my life is over." I ended the call and set the phone down, my fingers trembling slightly. A breeze drifted in through the open window, carrying with it the scent of pine and the soft rustle of leaves. For once, I didn't feel the need to brace myself against it. I simply let it pass through me. The next morning, I stood alone in the cottage, the quiet pressing in like a blanket. Dust floated in the golden light filtering through the window panes, and I realized I hadn't really seen this place in years, not with clear eyes, not without the weight of obligation clouding every corner. The space was still mine, not just legally, but spiritually. It was the one thing no one could take from me anymore. Helen arrived later with fresh groceries and a smile that didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. We cooked together in silence, the rhythm of chopping vegetables and simmering broth grounding me in the present moment. Later, sitting by the fire with a new book in my lap and her quiet breath beside me, I realized something else. This wasn't an ending. Not really. It was the start of something I'd never dared imagine. A life shaped not by duty or guilt or fear, but by choice, by me. "Grandma, please, it's not what you think. This isn't some scheme to take your money." "I've made up my mind, Elsie." My voice didn't waver. "I've already spoken to my attorney. The will is being revised. The cottage, my savings, everything I own, it's all going to the local art center here in Maine." I paused for a breath, letting the words hang between us, like the wind before a coming storm. "They're starting a scholarship fund," I continued, my tone even, "for young artists who don't have the means to pay for professional training. Kids who need someone to believe in them." A silence settled between us, thick and uncomfortable, crackling with everything he couldn't or wouldn't say aloud. "So that's it?" she asked after a while. Her voice was barely audible, a fragile whisper trembling down the line. "You're just cutting us out? Pretending we don't exist?" I shut my eyes, letting the question rest in the space between my ribs like a slow, familiar ache. When I answered, my voice was calm but firm, as steady as the sea. No, Elsie, you did that a long time ago. I'm only honoring the truth you gave me. The call ended, and the silence that followed felt different, quieter, softer. I stepped outside and made my way to the shore, where the ocean met the jagged rocks like old enemies in conversation. The breeze was sharp, laced with the briny scent of salt water and the resinous tang of pine. Overhead, the first stars blinked into view in the darkening twilight, silent, steady, untouchable. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I smiled. Not the hollow, rehearsed smile I'd worn like a costume at Elsie's wedding. No, this smile was real. It touched the corners of my eyes, warmed my chest, and loosened the knot that had lived inside me for far too long. I was no longer waiting. I was no longer hoping for something that would never come. I was finally free.